computer. So that is happening. We're recording. This is our special webinar on the science of fasting. We are taking a little hiatus until next week on our COVID-19 conversation, although I've got some burning questions for you, Karen. Some weird stuff's come up this week,
interesting.
starting with pandemic. But anyway, we can ask later. Oh, Tara Lee's here, Kathleen from Aurora, Illinois. So we're going to talk about fasting today. I know that we got a lot of Bright Line eaters that have been following us. So that's a kind of a big conversation in Bright Line eating. Hasn't been as much lately, but there's been times where there's been a lot of conversation around fasting. If anyone doesn't know what Bright Line eating is, it's a way of a lifestyle of eating where we don't eat flour or sugar and we commit our food and eat 3 meals a day. And a lot of people who follow that also choose to do fasting as part of their program. Fasting has so many health benefits, and the teaser was here. What's the world's greatest drug? Because Karen said something at the end of our COVID conversation last week about that. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And when you start looking into fasting, you do see that there are so many benefits. So again, just as a disclaimer, Karen's a scientist and a super smarty pants and a very curious human being. She has a fasting practice and has done a lot of research on fasting. She is, however, not a medical doctor.
Okay, great.
So Karen, I know, has prepared a presentation for us today, and then we'll go into a Q&A. We can even maybe have, if there's a question as we go along, we can even stop and take a break. If you have any questions, it would be most helpful if you put the question in the Q&A part, which is you can find down below in your search. And if you just want to say hello, you can say that, or just have a comment, you can put that in the chat. So let's
okay, so we can get started. And we thought we'd take a little break from COVID-19 because we normally do this on Sunday and people might be celebrating Mother's Day or have things to do. And this is kind of an interesting thing to bring in at this point, because many of us are stuck at home. You know, we're not doing a lot, but one thing we can do to help ourselves is to just improve our health status, okay? And we've definitely learned that a strong early immune response, the so-called cytokine storm, is very problematic for this disease. And if you have a lot of background inflammation in your body from obesity or whatever, fasting is something that can actually help with that. So if you've always been curious and wanted to start a practice, gently and slowly, now is probably an excellent time because you can actually protect yourself from some of the harmful effects of COVID at the same time. So I'm going to start to share my screen. Okay, now I had given this presentation with a colleague some time ago, but the information is still very relevant. Okay, I'm going to try to go into slideshow mode. So we had actually done this. This was done in Ghana, and we did it at a rural church where people do a lot of fasting. And what the goal was is to help people optimize their fasting practice to get the most health benefit out of it, seeing as people are doing it anyways. Okay, so now first of all, let me just point to a couple of authors. This is where I've derived most of the information for this presentation. Now, one of the key researchers on fasting, you can see his name right here. It's Walter Longo, and he wrote an excellent book for the general public called The Longevity Diet. Now, he's a very well-funded investigator at the University of Southern California. He's been studying fasting. He actually is an aging researcher, and he's been studying fasting for longevity. He's also studied fasting in terms of how it can augment the impact of chemotherapy. So Kristen wasn't that far off when she said it's a wonder drug. It has amazing potential. Now, I do want to also emphasize that there's still an awful lot we don't know. We don't know which fasting pattern is the best for which kind of things, depending on what you want to achieve. Now, another great person who has really the most amazing videos on YouTube, and I've downloaded many of them because he's really great with the science, and that is Jason Fung. Now, he is a kidney doctor who just got really frustrated because most of his patient population were diabetics who had very advanced kidney disease, and he couldn't help them. By the time he saw them, there was very little he could do. And he just came to see that he had to intervene a lot earlier in order to save people. So that's how he got into fasting with some of his colleagues, and he actually has a website and you can join his community. Now, there's some things about him that I don't think he's got the science all right, but he has a lot of practical protocols that you can use, and they work even though potentially his explanation of the science is not the whole story. So let me send you to one more website that I think is excellent. It's called Red Pen Reviews. Now you can see the URL up here, but if you just Google Red Pen Reviews, you're going to easily find it. Now these are this is some of the best. Okay, I'm going to stop the sharing and turn it back on in a sec, because what I want to do is share something different. I want to actually go to that site with you and, you know, look at some things together. Now, Red Pen Reviews is actually the brainchild. Now, let me get there. Is actually the brainchild of another great author that we've talked about in Bright Line Eating, called Stephen Guyenet. He wrote a book called The Hungry Brain, and his work is also excellent. What he and his colleagues decided to do is look at, you know, the books that the public were looking at, right? That people were touting on, you know, places like Dr. Oz and Oprah and all these, you know, very, very well-trafficked venues, but maybe they're not all that accurate. So for example, here's a review on Grain Brain, the surprising truth about wheat, carbs, and sugar, your brain's silent killers. Now, lumping everything in together might be problematic, but the reviews are presented in kind of a threefold way. So this is kind of your at a glance, what the quality of the book is about. So this book gets an overall score of 44%. Now notice here, scientific accuracy is only 20%. Correctly citing scientific references is only 63%. And overall healthiness is 50%. And how hard would it be to apply the book's advice? Very difficult. So it's quite interesting. So now if you want to know more, if you want to know like how they went into this, you can read a summary of the book, okay? And now you can go into really great detail on exactly how they arrived. Here were the 3 claims, and here's how they arrived at the conclusions they did. So you can go from anywhere from just sort of a general overview to a bit of, you know, a short summary to real depth in terms of what they're claiming. Now, unfortunately, there aren't a huge number of reviews here. So, for example, this is one of the books, this is Jason Fung's book, The Obesity Code. Now, as you notice, Jason hasn't fared all that well in terms of the science underlying his theory. Okay, so his overall score is 60%, but scientific accuracy is only 31%, okay? Reference accuracy is up to 73, but healthiness is 75. So Jason has some great recommendations, but part of his explanation is inaccurate and incomplete. So that kind of explains how he can get low on scientific accuracy, but the actual process he's suggesting is still quite good. And again, this rates it fairly difficult, again, depending on how easy fasting is for you. But you can also go through and look in detail at the claims and what's right and wrong. Now, the
Karen,
thing
who's reviewing these?
This is Stephen Guillenet, okay, and his colleagues. So you can also go to About Us. I thought, let's go even directly. I think contributors will show you. So he's the head of it. His science is very strong. And these are some colleagues that are also reviewing. So you can go and see what they did. I mean, they're qualified scientists for the most part, PhDs in nutrition, etc. And you can double check anything they say because they give a complete explanation as to why. And if you want to make a different judgment, you're welcome to do so. But what I like about this is I think it's very hard for the average person to make heads or tails of most of what you see out there. Even me, I'm a PhD scientist, and it really takes me a lot of effort to wade through some of this. But you can see that there are a lot of the very popular books, many of them referenced in BLE, don't necessarily score that high, okay? This is a common book we hear a lot about in BLE, and Stephen Guillenet actually had a statistician independently analyze the data from the China study, and he claims they reached different conclusions than what T. Colin Campbell actually reported. And I have heard that from a number of other people, that it's a large-scale epidemiological study from which a lot has been extrapolated that isn't necessarily entirely correct or even healthy. I like to look at what gets a good review. Now, the longevity diet,
Hold on 1 second. I just want to give some information. Thank you for asking, Jean. BLE is bright line eating. So it's just a shortened form of we call bright line eating. So thank you for asking.
Yes, there's plenty. Don't worry if you're not part of the bright line eating community. Don't worry at all. None of this requires bright line eating. But there are certain books that are highly recommended in bright line eating. And one of them is this, and another one, I mean, he didn't review his own book, but another book is The Hungry Brain. And the reality is the Hungry Brain and the China study are at odds with each other. And both of them.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, this just goes to show that's not necessarily a criticism, but it's a statement of the fact that nutrition is still a somewhat primitive science, and we're still working on it. I'm hopefully going to get to do a little of my own research in fasting when I get back to science after I leave my job in DC and return to Ghana. So the book I just recommended, The Longevity Diet, actually comes out pretty good, 82%. But it seems to be kind of low on scientific accuracy. And I think the reason for that is there's a lot of missing information. Healthiness is very high. Now, this is another one. I think I'll read this book based on its high score of 86%. It's called The Good Gut, how to improve your gut microbiome, which is also linked to obesity these days. But, stuff like The Grain Brain gets a very low score. The Bulletproof Diet, also a fairly low score. And yeah, I think there might be more reviews than these, but there's not a lot. I mean, the depth these guys go into is extraordinary. So I can't imagine they can do too many reviews. And they try to go for what the public is is really going for. Okay, so let's go back over.
So
What I
Jean is
want,
asking, how can there be a low science score and a high healthfulness? The
well,
healthfulness.
the same thing. I mean, that's the same thing that happened with Jason. The explanation they're giving about why it works may be incomplete or even incorrect, but the process they're recommending is extremely good and it is healthy, and you can look at your markers and see that your health is improving, even though the science they're using to explain it is wrong or incomplete. And I would say that no matter what, it's incomplete. And I'll just kind of jump a little bit. I wasn't planning on going deeply into this, but one of the things that Fong and a lot of people into fasting are saying is high levels of insulin are bad. Yeah, that's a fact. High levels of insulin are bad. And they do lead to metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular problems, diabetes. We know that. We know high levels of insulin aren't good. But the way these guys explain that there's like two compartments, like if your insulin levels are high, you can't burn fat. So therefore you should always be eating low carb. The story is not so simple as that, because fat itself can raise insulin levels. It's a more complex equation. So they don't have the explanation completely correct, but they have the method and what to do completely correct. Why it's as successful as it is, they're not all the way there, but they're there on the success. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and go back and share let me get back to my PowerPoint. Okay, great. All right. So this is where I had left us off. I just wanted to really show you where I'm getting my information. Now, this again, I probably don't need to really say this too much to this crowd, but I do want to emphasize something about the junk food that many of us love and have had an unhealthy relationship with. One reason people tend to go for these junky calories is that the food industry has engineered them to be what we call hyper palatable. And what does that mean neurologically? Well, we all know that dopamine is one of our feel-good chemicals, okay? And it also controls motivation to do something. So when you have a food that has both a lot of sugar and a lot of fat in it, that is about the most dopamine releasing product you can possibly imagine, okay? When you think about junk foods, think about what you love and ask yourself if there's a combination of sugar and fat in it. And chances are at least something that you love has that, because it's the most pleasure inducing. And because it is pleasure inducing, your brain starts to crave it. And the more you eat of these kinds of things, the more it's gonna, it's kind of like what do you call that? I'm thinking of the German word actually, because I've just heard a vicious circle, okay? In German, they call it a devil's circle, right? And I knew it wasn't a devil's circle. So it's a vicious circle of, you know, you eat it, it releases dopamine. And because that dopamine is there, you're motivated to get more of it, to keep giving yourself that feel good, you know, injection. It's a dangerous, you know, vicious circle to get into. And it takes a little bit of motivation to break it. If you get into the circle though, you can always break. You just have to come up with a plan and you can do it. But if you kind of don't go there, you'll be better off to start with. Not only, like this just compares, like the healthy choices not only are less caloric to begin with, but these guys, if you're eating these guys, there was an interesting study done at NIH. When you include this in your diet, you tend to get not just more empty calories, but you consume a lot more calories altogether not just because there are more in them, but because your cravings are kind of out of control. So this is just one thing. The brain is an important controller of going for unhealthy choices. Okay, now we all know fasting has a super long history. It's been part of religious practice for centuries, and only somewhat recently, in the past 150 years, really, have we started looking at it for its health benefits. And much more recently, the past 20 to 30 years, you know, largely as a result of Longo and colleagues' research focus, have we started to see everything it can do for us. But I really want to point out, there was a diabetes researcher in the early part of the 20th century, Dr. Joslin. He wrote a classic textbook on teaching, you know, a teaching textbook for medical students on diabetes. Now, in 1915, he was literally curing diabetics, not just managing it, not keeping it under control, but he was curing diabetics of their diabetes with fasting protocols. And Jason Fung is doing that today. So it took nearly 100 years for his successful therapy to be rediscovered.
How did it get lost?
You got to ask yourself, I've got to wonder. My only guess is it's a little hard to fast. You know, it's a little hard to give up food. You know, it's completely free. There's no drug. There's no incentive. The people who would have been incentivized to put this forward, you know, pharmaceutical companies, et cetera, it's not in their interest. But I mean, Fung eventually said, look, if I want to do anything for these people who are coming into my clinic, I've got to think differently, and whatever works, I'm going to adopt.
You know what, Karen, I guess it could also be this thing where as humans, and maybe it's modern humans, I don't know, or if it's just humans in general, it's this thing where we all would like something just to make it better, as opposed to having to do the work to make it better. Because that's just the facts, is that doing something like fasting, doing bright line eating, working on the work that I do, and in terms of emotional processing, like it can be painful. I mean, the results are good and it's worth it if you can get through it, but it does take some real grit.
Yeah, it takes discipline. And, you know, if you could get the same work of invisible warfare, you know, drinking soda water, who's not going to do that, right?
Totally.
But that's the reality. And, well, but here's what's very interesting. And one thing Fung points out, let's think about type 2 diabetes. Now, people may realize that type 2 diabetics are generally producing a lot of insulin. They're producing insulin. Their insulin levels are super high, but the cells lose their sensitivity to it, okay? So there are lots of reasons along the signaling pathway. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. But in general, how does this make sense? In biology, when we have a loss of sensitivity, the way to respond is not by overloading the system with the thing that the system is already insensitive to. The correct response is to withdraw the thing that the system is not responding to, and then the system regains its sensitivity. So the idea of injecting diabetics with yet more insulin seems to me, frankly, backwards, right? The idea is to lower that insulin, and that's why exercise and weight loss and dietary control work for diabetes. That's why fasting works even better, because nothing is going to lower your insulin levels more than not taking in any food whatsoever. Okay, so now this is something I took from Science Magazine. There was a wonderful article on optimizing your nutrition. And these are the various types of fasting. Now, again, there's all sorts of modifications on a theme, but these are These are, you know, the correct ways of describing them, because often we don't describe them properly. So this is something anyone can do. You don't even have to stop eating your regular foods. This is called time-restricted feeding. And what this means is you consume all of your calories within a window of between 4 to 12 hours in a day. This can have a really surprising protective effect against type 2 diabetes. It promotes weight loss, and you don't have to make, you know, great big changes. Now, interestingly, in general, many of us here are trying to lose weight. And what can you do when you want to lose weight? 80% of weight loss is your diet. 20% is your activity level. So that's never going to get you all the way there. Exercise, never. So what can you control? You can control the type of foods you eat. You can control the amount of food you eat. And you can control the timing of food presentation to your body. That's it. You've got 3 levers to pull. And if you're already pulling, well, I'm controlling the type of food, sugar and junk food are out of my diet. Number 2, you're pulling, you know, the one plate at a meal, not, you know, controlling your quantities, however you're doing that. What else can you do? There's only one more thing you can do, and that is kind of keep your eating within a window. Now, I've done a lot of this, and I found it really great for helping to, you know, when my weight loss has stalled, this kind of can keep it going. I try to aim for 8 hours, but, you know, it doesn't always work depending on my work schedule. So I expand that window to 10 to 12 hours. If you eat from, say you get breakfast around 7 and you have dinner and you stop eating by 6 p.m., well, you've confined your eating to an 11-hour window, and then you stop after that and you don't get any food until the next morning at 7. Very healthy. And it can protect you against, you know, some problematic things like diabetes and high cholesterol, and you getting kind of a mini fast. You know, it's small, but it'll help lower your insulin, and it's good for you.
And this is with bright line eating, by default, you kind of do this because we only eat 3 meals a day. I mean, it's hard unless you, for some reason, have dinner late.
Unless you have really weird timing of your eating, it's true. Like if you're kind of on a normal schedule with bright line eating, you'll sort of do it like probably most people. Even if you start eating at 6 a.m., if you're an early riser, you're probably going to be finished with your food around 6 p.m. But you could pay attention if you've got kind of like to eat dinner late, you could think about this and maybe move it up a little bit, or even if you really love eating dinner late, maybe have instead of lunch and breakfast, have a brunch at 10 or 11, and then you can still get that benefit. So bright line eating does have that level of flexibility if it can work for you. So now this is the thing that people tend to misuse the most in terms of how they refer to it. Intermittent fasting or periodic fasting. Now, what this means going at least for a 24-hour period, one day without eating anything at all, okay? Now this could go, you know, it could go as long as 1 to 2 days of a fast, and then you just pick up your regular diet. So the schedule for this, you eat normally one day and fast the next, or you do 1 to 2 days of fasting per week. Can be together, can be Monday and Thursday, whatever you want to do. It's your call. And again, this tends to protect against obesity, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure. And now you're starting to get into real, you know, that kind of you're looking at increasing your lifespan. Okay.
And this is now, what you do, right, Karen?
I do both of these. I do the time restricted, and, you know, most of the time, and I do the intermittent fasting. And I also do something that, I also do prolonged fasting, which we'll come to next. But these are all simple. Now, there's another thing called 1 meal a day. And this is what a lot of our religious fasters do, okay? They just eat their regular diet, but they choose 1 meal. And usually it's evening because the religious fasters, often it's sunrise to sunset when they're not eating. And again, this can be very strong. Again, same level of protection against obesity, cardiovascular disease, and hypertension. However, watch it with this, because this works, but what you don't want to do is go crazy on that 1 meal and consume 3,000 calories, right? When you do this 1 meal a day, you can have more than you would at a normal meal. You can make it a bigger meal than maybe a standard meal that you're doing under time-restricted feeding, but you don't want to negate the benefits by throwing in a lot of junk or just really trailing this 1 meal into 3 or 4 hours of binging, right? Although that may be allowed under the religious law because it's after sunset, you're not going to get the health benefit. And many of my Muslim students in Ghana, they were very serious Ramadan fasters, but they went a little crazy, you know, after dusk and before dawn. And I said, look, you're fine from the religious perspective, but you're losing a health benefit that you could easily get by just paying a little more attention. Now, this is really interesting. This is a diet developed by Valter Longo and, you know, adapted by others. So this is a reduced food intake for about 5 days, okay? The fasting mimicking diet gets you almost all the benefits of a pure fast, but with a lot less, let's just say it's easier to do. How much easier? It depends on the person. I honestly find it's easier to do a pure fast than to tease myself with the fasting mimicking diet.
Yeah,
and I've come
me
and
too.
I mean, I go with nothing than tease myself. So basically you get about 30% of your normal calorie intake. And here's how you try to do it. You're eating 50% fat, 10% protein, and 40% carbohydrate. But you're only getting about 500 to 800 calories a day, depending on your body size. You're going for very small meals, okay, no snacking at all. And you do it for 5 days per month. Or, you know, three to 5 times a year if you're not going for weight loss. Normally, when you want to go for weight loss, you'll do this monthly. But if that's not a goal, you can back off on it. Now, this is really fascinating. This is where you start to get the really serious benefits. And here you're getting protection against cancer, diabetes, lowering inflammation dramatically. You're renewing the cells of your body. So it's positive for many age-related diseases. And part of the theory here, and again, there needs to be more research, but there is some, you're getting the benefit of lowered insulin. You're getting all that, but you're also getting a process. It takes about 3 days for the process to kick in. It's called autophagy. And that's when your body, the vulnerable cells in your body, they die off first, okay? Your body is looking to recycle proteins. So it identifies cells that are damaged and they die off, okay? And they're replaced by healthy cells. Fasting also promotes the production of stem cells. And these are the healthy young new cells that are going to be replacing the bad ones. There's a professor at Boston College who published a paper that it's somewhat speculative, but it totally influenced me. And he had a theory that if you do a 7 to 10 day fast yearly, that's probably enough to wipe out all the cells in your body that are precancerous. And it could be the single most effective cancer preventative going, okay? Now, again, this doesn't mean you gorge on junk food, 355 days of the year and then do a 10-day fast. But if you're doing a pretty good job with your diet, a pretty good job with your health, with sleep, adding something like this could really be, we talk a lot about detox, which frankly doesn't have a lot of meaning. Most of what we call detoxes don't do anything in particular. The liver is the best detoxification organ that has ever been invented. The liver can do a better job than any juice or herb supplement or anything you're going to buy. But renewal and stem cell production, now that you cannot, there's no way to initiate that I'm aware of without fasting. Now, mind you, this is an ongoing process. The body does this continuously, but when you stop and fast, it ramps it up dramatically. So that was something that really influenced my thinking. Again, I want to emphasize the science is not all the way there, but it's getting there. Okay.
So Karen, can I ask you a question? Okay. Oh, you're going to talk about prolonged fast now.
I'm
curious about the intermittent, not the intermittent, the fasting mimicking versus prolonged, and are the benefits the same?
Okay, so this is all Longo's work, mind you. And Longo actually developed a product. And the trademark fasting mimicking diet, he's trademarked that. Like, you have to buy his stuff, and it's not cheap. Like, he has a lot of products he's made, and they basically deliver this to you. So a lot of people have tried to do this on their own, and Longo has found that the benefits he tracks, things like reduction of insulin-like growth factor 2, or is it 1 or 2? We'll see on the next slide, I forget, but I'll tell you something interesting about that particular growth factor. What he's found is this is almost the same as pure water fasting. Now, mind you, he doesn't track everything, but the kind of things he tracks, he developed this for people who just can't make it through a fast. Okay, so now the beneficial prolonged fast. Now, this, we define that as more than 1 to 2 days, okay? And I want to give this disclaimer to anyone. Yeah, if you're thinking about really extended fasting, this should really be done with medical supervision. Healthy adults, I mean, most of the people doing this say a healthy adult can probably fast for 5 days, water fast for 5 days without any negative sequelae, probably doesn't have to worry. But if you've got some health issues, or if you take on medications, your medication levels can change dramatically during a fast. So you really want to do this in collaboration with a physician if you've got some problems, if you're trying to use fasting to solve problems beyond just weight loss and general health. So for an average adult under the age of 65, 5-day water fast 3 to 4 times a year or monthly if you're trying to lose weight can really help move you there. Now, people ask, what can I take during a fast? What will be okay without breaking the fast? So option 1, if you can do this, it's just water. Now, this is a flavored water. You shouldn't even do that, but unflavored sparkling water is fine. Water, tap water, any kind of plain old water without any kind of flavoring or anything in it. Black coffee, tea, no sugar or milk, obviously, or even if you really need to, bone broth. Okay, chicken bone broth, beef bone broth. It's very low calorie. It has some protein in it, a little bit of fat. Now,
you need to minimize the amount of bone broth you take. Like, could you, like, you know, go crazy?
You minimize it. You minimize it. The idea is you don't want to get more than 50 calories.
Okay.
When you take your bone broth. And a cup of bone broth is in the high 40s. So you don't even need to take a whole cup of it. Like, what they recommend for people, often during a fast, you might get a little lightheaded, and then you can easily fix that by taking a little salt. You know, you can sprinkle a little salt in water and have a drink. That often helps with some of the fasting symptoms, and it's pretty safe. Bone broth provides you that salt. It provides you a little bit of protein. And some people take a daily multivite or other supplement depending on the goals that they want to achieve, okay? I do this regularly, and I don't, usually after the second day, you don't feel any more hunger. That gets under control very quickly. Now, what you want to do when you break this fast, if you're doing a 5-day fast, and then you jump into regular eating, you're going to feel like an upset. You're going to feel like that food is very heavy in your stomach. So you want to start gradual. You eat lightly and then gradually resume your regular healthy diet. You want to start with vegetables maybe on day 1, just salads. And then on day 2, add a little bit of meat. One key feature that a lot of people report bad experiences with, and I can tell you from personal bad experience, always avoid eggs on day 1 after a fast. For some reason, you're going to feel an upset stomach if you have an egg right after a fast. But on day 2, you should be fine.
Karen, do you have a specific recommendation if you are a bright line eater and how you would structure that?
Well, I can say that there are even protocols now. Bright line eating, they call the fasting mimicking diet the metabolic reset diet, okay? The metabolic reset plan. And for bright liners, there are even guidelines, and Susan even has shown what she does, and other people have shown what they do. So if you want to try that and you're a bright line eater, there are complete guided instructions and specific menus on the site.
Okay, good.
And you can just go for it. Like I said, I've tried that. I've done that. And I've sometimes used that to come out of a fast. I've come out of a fast on a metabolic reset. Like I once did a 5-day, I think it was a 4-day fast. Then I just, some days I can't quite get through the 5 days. So the 5th day I was feeling weak and tired. And whenever you don't feel well, it's time to stop. So I had a little bit something. Then I went back to try to continue, and I used the metabolic reset for another 5 days. I was fine. So it really depends. It depends on you. And as I mentioned, the 7 to 10 day water fast once per year, there is some evidence it could lead to reduction in cancer. Again, the same things hold. Water, nothing more. But if you can't, it really comes down to try to limit yourself to only 50 calories once. And if you can't do it once, limit yourself to 50 calories twice. Just keep it very low. Now, if this is too hard, do your best. What I would sometimes add is some coconut water or a small amount of, when I say milk, I tend to mean almond milk, coconut milk, not dairy milk, okay? And if that's not enough, like if you just can't do water fasting even with a little bit of add-on, well, maybe try the fasting mimicking diet. And usually you don't want to dive right into this as the first thing you're going to do. Try a 1-day fast. Try a time-restricted feeding. You got to build up to it just because it's different, and you want to change your life that dramatically. It can be challenging. Now, there are people doing more than 10-day water fasts. And why would you want to do that? There are some very good reasons. And these are for very specific health concerns, like diabetes, severe obesity, severe inflammatory conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. And it's been also shown to be very good for migraine, okay? Now, this is the kind of fast you never want to do it without medical supervision at a good facility where they know how to do fasting. And many people have been hurt by low quality facilities, okay? So you definitely want to do your research. If you have some issues like this, like for example, the longest fast ever recorded in the Guinness Book of Records was 382 days.
Wow.
A 27-year-old obese man went from 208 kilos to 82 kilos, okay? Wow.
Wow.
He took a multivite on a daily, a daily multivite, and he fasted for over a year. But to him, it was worth it. He was severely obese. A kilo is 2.2 pounds. So double that to get a sense of, how much weight he
I
lost.
wonder if he kept the weight off.
I'm told he did. I mean, this was under close medical supervision. Okay. And at the end of the day, although something like this is intensely hard on your body, he had the fuel and he burned it off. Now, I think he'd have been a very interesting guy to study in how did he accommodate to this? I mean, what happened to his resting metabolic rate? Could he exercise? Like how was he different after, he lost all this weight in a relatively short period of time? So I wonder if the stress of that didn't shorten his life for other reasons. Because one thing that does happen in a fast, you tend to raise your levels of cortisol, okay? And again, this is partly kind of a stress response. We all know cortisol is a stress hormone. And one thing I've noticed in my longer fasts is I have to do a lot more meditation to get to sleep because I've got, slightly higher circulating cortisol.
And is that like a little bit of your fight or flight response kicks in?
It is,
Because you're not
in a
getting the food
sense,
you need?
yeah. Because one thing you do in fight or flight, you get ready to run, right? Your hunger is depressed. I mean, you don't want to stop for food when you're in flight mode, right? So
Right.
it really kind of makes you a little bit, it also controls hunger, makes you a little bit anorexic, gets you ready to move and start hunting for food. What I've come to really appreciate in reading the literature of the paleoarchaeologists, our species wasn't designed to be eating daily. We never did. We got lucky some days and we feasted. Then we often went without food for periods of time, and we considered that very normal. Eating a lot daily is a very modern phenomenon, and that's probably not optimal for us. Probably these breaks when we couldn't find food was helping to repair our bodies and, regenerate, damaged tissues. So anyhow, and this slide sort of reflects the fact that this was done this presentation was given in a part of Ghana. We had kind of a blend. It was both a Christian and a Muslim community. And what we were trying to do is tell people, make your fast healthier, okay? Because often what people were doing, they were breaking their fast at the end of the day, and they went nuts, okay? They would eat any kind of anything and would gobble up almost a day's worth of normal food, in preparation for the next day. You don't want to do that, okay? There's no need of doing it. And if you can just get enough to satisfy your hunger, have a normal meal, even slightly bigger than normal, make it healthy, keep out the junk food, and it's just going to stand you in better stead when you're doing your fast anyhow. Now, a note on dry fasting. There hasn't been evidence. I mean, Muslims do the dry fasting, no water, okay? Now, early research is suggesting dry fasting might lead to greater weight loss, but we haven't seen definite evidence yet. Whether there's any benefit to not getting water, it's just unclear. And again, this is if you're in a tradition where dry fasting is the norm, there doesn't seem to be any problem with it either, but whether you're getting added benefit from the health perspective, no evidence as yet. Now, what happens? I'm going to show you some data. Okay, on day one, starting on your first day, I mean, towards the end of the first day, your gene expression has changed, dramatically even. You're ramping up your ability to burn fat. Now, during the first 2 days, you start burning your stored glycogen in the liver, okay? So glycogen is polymerized glucose. You got some of it in your liver, some of it in your muscles. You start burning your stores, okay? Now, we don't have a ton of that. We only have about 2,000 calories of stored glycogen. And we use that, we tend to use that when we do intense exercise or there's a burst and, you just have to run real fast for a few seconds. That's when we tap into those reserves. We tend to burn fat on more gentle exercise at 60% of max. When we exceed 60% of max, we go for both the creatine system and the stored glycogen. Okay, so by days 2 or 3, you're burning fat and your liver begins a process called gluconeogenesis to start making glucose for the tissues that need it. Now, there are 3 tissues that just cannot burn fat. The brain, some cells in the brain. The brain can also burn ketones, which are a product of fat breakdown, but even in long fasts, your brain, most of it prefers glucose, and there's evidence your brain is burning glucose because it does this process, which effectively just means de novo glucose synthesis, okay? So there's the brain, the red blood cell, and cells in the kidney. They just are not, they're not suited. They don't have the apparatus to burn ketones for fuel. They want glucose. But we can make it. We can make glucose from amino acids, and our body does it very well. Now, by day 3, your body is doing a lot of repair. Okay, so it kind of knows the gut isn't expecting food, so it starts kind of destroying and replacing damaged cells. Now, what happens? Your insulin levels drop, your blood glucose drops, and this fascinating growth hormone, insulin-like growth factor 1. Let me tell you an amazing story about IGF-1. There are populations, and they're being studied. Longo studies them. They don't have it. The IGF-1, their gene is defective, and they don't make the stuff. These guys are inoculated against cancer and cardiovascular disease. Wow. They smoke, they drink, they go nuts with junk food, and there is virtually no cancer or cardiovascular problem in this population.
Where is this?
They're in South America, okay? Wow. Now, one thing Longo really tracks is in Americans, this growth factor is very high, okay? Levels of it are high because our diet is crap. And this predisposes to both cancer and cardiovascular disease. So the fasting mimicking diet helps you to drop this. Eating healthy on a regular basis helps you to drop this. And you, by all means, want this thing down.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It is. It's really, I wish I got lucky with that one,
But there's a way to do that. You're...
But there's a way, right?
Yeah.
The fasting mimicking diet and eating healthy generally, getting the binging out of your life. Eating a lot is not good for anybody. That's another health risk in and of itself. So, and again, if you stop this, your IGF-1 levels will stay low as long as you keep up the good eating and the intermittent fasting, the 5-day fasting. As long as you keep it up, you're going to be fine. But when you stop, you go back up.
So basically what you're saying though is like say right now, you start this process, if you don't currently have a disease, you could prevent getting a disease. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter what stage of life you're in.
Doesn't matter what stage of life you're in.
Okay.
Now, one thing about fasting in older people, this has to be a little more careful after the age of 65 because older people, just the hormones in their body in general are not optimized for maintaining muscle mass. And that's something you want to be careful. We do have amino acid stores in our body, and gluconeogenesis happens. We withdraw those amino acids from stores and start making glucose from them. But because older people are at slightly higher risk for muscle wasting, that's where you want to be careful. You can still do it probably if you're active if you're in good physical shape, you can keep fasting a lot longer. But you got to be aware you're in a regime in your life where your hormone, male and female both, your hormones are such that they're not optimal for fat, for making new muscle.
Okay.
You can change that. Okay. So now here's like the science of fasting.
I've got a couple. Can we just stop for a minute with a couple of comments?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So Jean said she usually eats 12 hours, divides breakfast in two, same with lunch, and then dinner with yogurt snack, 1,500 calories. So I have first breakfast at 8:30, second breakfast at 11, first lunch at 1 or 1:30, second lunch around 4, dinner at 6, and yogurt 7, fruit at 8:30. Also, my body requires a very high level of fiber, which keeps my gut happy, and I don't feel hungry.
Well, if it's working for you, there's lots of different evidence about multiple smaller meals versus 3 meals. Again, the science isn't all the way there. So what the best nutritionists and exercise physiologists tell you, do the experiment and find what works for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Simple as that.
Marty shared a couple of different things, which were, she says she tends to eat from 12 noon to 7, and that they have lost weight and feel more energized, no more dairy, they're more vegan.
Okay. And that, again, what is good for you personally, a lot of it comes from your history, okay? Yep. People who came from cattle rearers tend to be a little bit better with dairy than populations who didn't. But one thing that's absolutely certain, there are human populations, ultra healthy, subsisting on everything from almost all seal fat, seal blubber and meat, to high levels of carbs and rice and vegetables. The whole gamut, everywhere in between. And what we're really appreciating, we have for 20 years, but we don't know how to make it actionable. Genetics of nutrition, for example, what's healthy for me could make somebody else sick. Mm-hmm. Because I came from the cattle breeders and stuff like that. And where you've come from and what your ancestors were adapted to eating often is a very good sign for what you should be doing and how you'll feel your best. But in reality, human populations have done everything under the sun and have been very healthy, very, very energetic. It just depends. So I am definitely not any kind of a purist on you got to be vegan, you got to be paleo, you got to be this, that, or the next thing. There are some general principles that probably apply to almost everyone, but not too many, right? So, I mean, I've often heard people say, well, you know, the cardiovascular and stuff, those things are less common in vegans. And yes, that's absolutely true. But certain other kinds of diseases are far more common. So it sort of evens out. You know, there's a plus to everything and a minus to everything. So and you just find what's right with you.
Marty says her 93-year-old mom eats between 12 and 8. It looks amazing. What does eating this way, she asked if that's intermittent fasting, and technically, according to you, that's not intermittent fasting.
No, that's time-restricted feeding.
Right.
And
a lot of people do call that intermittent fasting, though.
Exactly. Yes, that's a common error.
Yeah. So intermittent fasting is when you really fast for at least
24 hours, basically. Yeah. We call, you know, it's kind of an arbitrary cutoff, but 24 hours is an intermittent fast. And usually people make it 36. For instance, they'll stop eating at like 6 p.m. one day. Then they'll fast the whole next day, and then 2 days have breakfast around 7 or 8, and it adds up to like 36 hours. So most 24-hour fasts aren't exactly 24; they're 36. So that's giving you a little more benefit.
Extra time.
But here, let's look at what we're burning. Okay.
Okay.
Now, when you just start fasting, look at this. Okay, this is approximately. You know, when you're on, this is day 0, like of your fast. This is like leading up to your fast. But let's say your fast starts on day 0. What you're normally burning is carbohydrate because you're eating, right? Okay, you're eating, your main source is carbohydrate. A lesser source is fat and ketone bodies, which is a breakdown product of fat metabolism. And you are definitely not using protein. I mean, protein is used for gluconeogenesis. It's not efficient when the other sources are available. Why would you even think about that? So now you start fasting, okay? So you just don't have as much carb. You know, you're burning through your glycogen reserves. So your glycogen reserves, oops, sorry, let me go back. Sorry about that. So, you know, your glucose, your carbs are dropping off like a rock, right? Then you start burning your fat and ketones, and that is your main source, even into more than 30 days of fasting. But this I find most important and interesting because people are always afraid they're going to burn their muscles away. No, okay, no, it doesn't happen. You barely use protein to create new glucose, okay? So now here again, we're looking at like, what's the source, okay? So this is now done with hours and then into days. So glucose, what you're eating, okay, that gets used up really quick, okay? By 5 or 6 hours into your fast, what you've eaten in your last meal is gone. You know, you've digested that. It's been used. Now, glycogen, this is your polymerized glucose, your stored glucose. All right, so a couple of days, like this is now, remember, this is hours. So your glycogen, by day 2 in your fast, this is gone. You don't have any more left, right? You know, you start using it right away, and depending on how big your store is, doesn't last, and how active you are, because you're going to use that very quickly. So what does start ramping up is this gluconeogenesis, okay? Making glucose from amino acids. And you do keep a basal level of that going on from your amino acid stores and even from some proteins, because as I said, there are 3 types of cells in your body that don't really, either can't or prefer not to burn ketone bodies. So that is basically what happens to, you know, that's how you're fueling yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here we have like about a 3-day fast, okay? Now, this is your plasma insulin. Now, this is definitely something you want to drop, okay? You definitely want your insulin levels low, because low insulin levels promote fat burning, okay, for one thing, and they're generally healthier for you. As insulin drops, this IGF-1 it also is going to be dropping. So, and why this little area is called the fasting sweet spot, the 18 to 24 hours, the single day of intermittent fast, the total increase in lipid kinetics, 60% occurred between 12 and 24 hours of fasting, okay? Now, what that's saying, you're in this last 6 hours of a 24-hour fast, you're really like getting into those fat stores and, you know, getting that out. Now, then you see there's a little bit of a level off here, and there's some interesting reasons for that. You know, these error bars are pretty big, but you can, you know, keep going. But you notice the decrease is fastest here, okay? So you're really mobilizing the triglycerides. You're getting the triglycerides, which is the storage form of your fat, out of your fat cells, and you're burning those suckers. You know, it's just keeping yourself running, okay? Now, plasma insulin decreased by 50% between 12 and 72 hours of fasting. And of the total decline, 70% occurred within the first 24 hours, right? Wow. So it just goes to show you don't necessarily need to go crazy to get a very strong, you know, benefit. So even if you want to step into it gradually and say eat dinner at, you know, finish your dinner at 6 or 7 p.m., then not have any food again until your next day's dinner, you'll do a lot of good for yourself.
Wow.
Okay. you'll get some major benefits.
I like
Now,
that idea of stepping into it. I think that's super
yeah,
smart.
step into it slowly. And if it doesn't work for you, what I always recommend people who've, they're stepping into it. Often a lot of people I know that want to step in, they also have a religious practice. There's no religion where we can't weave that in. Like the Catholics often like to do fasting Friday, and Muhammad himself recommended people fast on Monday and Thursdays. So I mean, there's something to fit in with every kind of religion that exists. The Baha'is have a 19-day, fasting, like they eat one meal after dusk in March. So every religion. And I always tell people to try to link it to their tradition so they can feel a part of their history and something greater than themselves, while at the same time helping their health. And as I always say, there is no God on this planet that is against you helping your health in addition to a spiritual practice.
Yeah, it's really making it a spiritual practice.
Exactly. It's like no God would object to you thinking of your health as you do your spiritual practice, right? They don't have, it's not one or the other. They work in tandem. And why not? So, okay. All right. Now, who should not fast? You don't want kids fasting. Okay. As they get, when you start hitting 16, 17, if kids want to fast, it's a little, I would be open to that. But young kids shouldn't be fasting. Pregnant and breastfeeding moms, people who are underweight or malnourished, people who have disordered eating also shouldn't start this because it feeds into an anorexic or bulimic cycle. So people with eating disorders don't even touch this. Maybe after they're fully recovered, fine. But people who are sick should not be doing this. I mean, if you start to feel ill, you're uncomfortable, have what I say to everyone, like I recommend, link it to your own religious tradition and have what I call the emergency action plan. Write it out ahead of time so you don't go crazy. So if you start to feel ill, say to yourself, if I start to feel ill, I'm going to eat this and then break the fast. And if you're okay, like I usually start with, if I start to feel ill, I'm going to have half a cup of bone broth and then wait a half hour. If I'm okay, I continue. If I'm not, then I might add more on and eventually a full meal. It really depends. But very few people who are healthy and in good shape can't get through that first day somehow. It's now where you have to be a little bit careful, if you're on medication, if you have chronic illnesses, and if you're older than 65. You get medical advice because you might need to reduce your meds. In fact, that's what Fung found with his diabetic patients. Gradually, they had to reduce their insulin, and eventually they were completely cured of diabetes once they got to normal weight and normal eating. And they did fasting protocols, and on the non-fasting days, they were pretty normal. They didn't go binging, but they didn't give up everything. They kept every kind of food they really liked in extreme moderation. And the fasting, he says himself, he uses fasting so he can enjoy a little indulgence from time to time at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and he makes up for it by fasting. And that realistically makes a lot of sense. When we look at hunter-gatherer tribes, these guys get lucky and they find a beehive and they get honey. They can get 5,000 calories one day. Then maybe for 3 days, nothing. Then they get 1,000 calories, then 2,000, then nothing for 2 days. We are built to manage that way. Not that we necessarily always want to, but our ancestors did it, and we wouldn't be here if it hadn't worked for them. Yeah. So fasting is an excellent tool. If you're in one of these categories, you want to do it cautiously and just seek medical advice. Don't jump into anything without really finding out if it's right for you. And as I've been emphasizing, if you feel unwell, just stop it. If you feel pain in the chest, stomach, or abdomen, that's another sign that you want to stop immediately. Burning sensation in the stomach, urge to vomit, dizziness, or feeling faint. Now, if you're just feeling a little lacking in energy, you could try some coconut water, some salt water. But if it persists, you want to stop. You know, I sometimes feel like, oh, I can tell I don't have enough glucose. Then I just maybe add a little salt to water and drink it. I'm fine. But there are times when I've been really kind of tired and I had to work. So I aborted the fast because I said, look, if I could just rest and I didn't have a work day, I could probably continue. But I did have that work day, and consequently, I wanted to be my best at work. And hey, live to fast another day is my attitude, you know. Now, can fasting cause you some physical problems? Your cortisol levels do rise, and that can cause some, you know, a little bit sleep disturbance. As I said, I have to meditate more, but once you start eating again, that goes completely away. Now, gallstones can be a problem. This was for an African audience. Gallstones are very rare in Africans. In Caucasians, they're more common. In Hispanics, they're more common. It tends to happen with very rapid weight loss when you introduce a lot of fat back in quickly. So one thing that helps that I do just in general, I sometimes have a little bit of apple cider vinegar in water, just any day. You know, I take a little vinegar in a salad. Vinegar dissolves these micro gallstones before they ever become problems. Now, restriction can trigger a higher desire for more food in some people. And that is something I sometimes struggle with. Like after the fast, I kind of, oh, I want more and more. So I have to really plan and watch what I'm doing after the fast, because that can, I'm trying to almost like make up for it.
Yeah.
And if you don't eat a healthy diet after fasting, if you fall into like what I jokingly call snout down into a tub of ice cream, you're going to lose the metabolic gains. You'll get those insulin levels up right away. Right. So why do you want to do that? You know, I say that to myself, that, you know, the science often helps prevent me from doing something stupid. Not 100% of the time, I'll admit it. But often you can say to yourself, I just did this good stuff for myself. How do I want to build on that and keep this going? So I'm going to be my best self for as long as I can possibly be that. Yeah. So now I think I'm going to skip this so we're getting to the end of our time. I want people to have questions.
Yeah. So, you know, so if anyone has any questions about what they've heard, please ask. One thing I'm a little curious about, I'm going to actually look, because I think a comment here, hold on. Let's see. She said, she was talking about animal hormones and, you know, kind of when we were talking about the meat stuff. Oops, somehow I've lost us for a second here. Let's see if I can find it again. Okay. She was just talking about farming and animals and how that the animals that we often raise in the U.S. aren't necessarily.
Oh yeah, we do a lot. Our animal husbandry practices are disgusting, and the way we've bred them. I won't even touch a chicken unless it's like I know it's. I mean, the definition of free range, by the way, is having like 2 feet to walk around in. And the way they're bred, their breasts, the chicken breasts they're arthritic in the hips. I mean, even a totally normal chicken grown in the US is suffering from day one. I won't touch them. I mean, I won't mind like if it's a farm where they really are running around and they're not bred to have ultra heavy breasts, so they're not arthritic in the hips and so forth. Fine, I don't mind that. But I don't buy anything that's mass produced. Like I do eat red meat, but I'm going to buy buffalo, which isn't raised like that. And my meat sources are fish, buffalo. I won't touch a chicken. And like for other proteins, I do buy a lot of the Beyond Meat products and beans. You know, they're vegetarian. People are saying stuff like, you know, well, those Beyond Meat products, They're very processed. And yeah, I'm thinking about that. You know, there's a lot of stuff in there. They're highly processed foods. Are they good for me? But they're definitely, you know, there's a question mark there. They're tasty and they're plant-based, but just because it's plant-based doesn't mean it's healthy. So I think, and my decision is not even necessarily about the healthiness of the food, it's the suffering of the animals.
Yeah, and that's what Marty just mentioned, is how much the animals suffer. Yeah. So does anybody else, and Jean says thank you, she's got to go somewhere. She says that she is, thank you very much. It's been very interesting. She's 82, so not likely to start fasting.
Yeah, no, it's not necessarily something you need.
Yeah. One of my sort of questions is, you know, being the mother of a relatively young child, I have a 12-year-old, almost 12-year-old next week, you know, fasting and having to prepare food for somebody else. Like, and how to manage that challenge? Because like, and I guess on some level I do it in Bright Line Eating, and that I prepare Adrian food that I don't eat. But at the same time, like just having to be around the food and doing like a real fast, a water fast, you know, seems a little,
Yeah, that would be the thing where I would prepare everything he's going to have ahead of time. Maybe even have him heat it up, you know, like you don't have to get near it, you know.
right.
Say, hey, here's your dinner, Adrian. Let's get it into the microwave. We're going to just heat it up and you're good to go.
Yeah, I don't have a microwave.
Or
No,
put it in the oven. How do you heat that up? You know, prepare it
in the pot or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, do whatever it is that you
That's
normally
a good idea. Yeah.
Or even takeout that day. Like, what does he like? Maybe, okay, I'm going to get you takeout. It's delivered.
Yeah.
You take it. You sit down. I just ignore
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good idea. Thank you. I actually hadn't thought about that. I know that sounds crazy, but it didn't occur to me that I could do that. Marty says most plant-based people don't eat Impossible Burgers. She thinks it helps people cross over into the veggie life. Are there any other questions before we end our conversation here? We do have about 5 more minutes left on our time. Any thoughts, any questions? Oh, Bev says, thank you so much, Karen and Kristen. Will you post these slides with a follow-up? I will send a follow-up and send some links. Can you share these slides, Karen?
I don't see why not. I just made them from stuff on, you know, mostly fung and nothing special about them.
But we can certainly do that in our follow-up email. Any other questions? I was curious about that, and we mentioned it about this, you know, why do people call it intermittent fasting and it's not? Because I mean, really, that's kind of, it's a hot thing right now. People have been saying intermittent fasting.
Yeah, because I think, it's a 12-hour fast, you know. The reason why I try to distinguish the two is you're not getting too many benefits in the 12-hour window. Like, they really kick in after that. I mean, the 12-hour window helps you to kind of keep your glucose and your insulin levels stable. Like, spiking them isn't great. And, you know, so TRF is good, particularly for weight control and glucose, you know, glucose level control. It's all good. But where you start really seeing benefits, it's that, like the 36 hours, you start getting some significant benefit. And the longer you go up to a certain point, it just increases. So, I mean, I just try to be more precise. So, you know, TRF gets you certain things. Intermittent fasting gets you more things. Prolonged fasting gets you even more things, and then super prolonged fasting, that's therapeutic. That's really to cure something, right?
And do people that, I know that, because one of the things your disclaimer was don't do this if you're ill.
Right, absolutely.
Are there studies where people are curing cancer and things like this by doing fasting? Like, because I know that there's books and diets that are specifically for cancer. Is that happening where people are healing themselves with fasting?
Well, what they're doing with cancer, there's some fascinating work that Longo has done. what they've actually found is that fasting can potentiate chemo. And here's how it works. Cancer cells are dividing faster. You know, that's the nature of cancer. Your cells
Right.
divide uncontrollably. They're more dependent on glucose.
Okay.
So when they don't get glucose, they're going to die easier when the chemo hits them. So he's been doing a lot of research on, like, people about to get chemo do a little bit of fasting, and it makes their chemo that much more effective.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool.
So he's got a lot there. In fact, if anyone I hear that's diagnosed, I tell them they should look into those protocols, because I would do it myself. Again, I've not heard of anybody doing that exclusively. Where I've seen some really nice effects with prolonged fasting is people with chronic inflammation, migraines. People have fasted up to 45 days and completely cured heretofore intractable problems. And wow, I mean, that's the kind of thing you go to a special clinic and you work with the doctors who've seen that and know how to deal with it. It's been documented. It happens, you know. A lot of what we have that's chronic is a result of high levels of inflammation in the body. And there's nothing like fasting to get that down.
All right, well, that's exciting. Such a great practice for people that are dealing with, you know, people that have autoimmune.
Yeah, they've done a lot with people with rheumatoid arthritis, really reducing pain. You know, I don't know every type of study. I've seen it mostly for diabetes, and it's magnificent for that. And, you know, my dad himself died of complications of diabetes. And I've often wondered, nobody ever talked to him about fasting, or, you know, he was a very disciplined guy. I bet if he had known, he would have done it, but nobody presented it to him.
Saved his life.
Exactly.
Karen, thanks so much. This has been awesome.
Yeah, a little different change, something different. So
we will be back next week on Sunday for another installment of the COVID-19. It'll be installment number 8. So hope to see you guys back here for that. And I will send a follow-up with some of these links and the slides as well.
Okay,
right.
Great. So
have
a wonderful Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.